Wake up, buddy. Sleeping out here lands you in jail today.
Been walking all night. Just needed a minute to breathe, man.
Did I ask? I said, get the hell up!
This is exactly why Americans hate cops nowadays. Undercover police chief, you're fired.
On a clear spring morning in Stonebrook City Park, a rookie officer made a mistake that would derail his career and expose a deeper systemic failure inside his department. Officer Tyler Knox, 24 years old, barely 6 weeks out of the academy, had been assigned to morning patrol and quality of life enforcement, a role typically reserved for officers trusted to exercise discretion and compassion. But at 7:43 a.m., his body camera captured him towering over a black man sitting quietly on a brightly colored metal bench, treating him with open mockery and hostility. Knox believed the man was homeless. He believed he was powerless. He believed he could treat him however he wanted. But the man he harassed was actually the department's own undercover chief of internal affairs, conducting a scheduled integrity test on new recruits. Within hours, Knox's behavior would spark a scandal that ended his employment and triggered a citywide investigation. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit subscribe. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light.
Tyler Knox grew up in Mercer Falls, a town with one stoplight and a population that barely cracked 4,000. His father had been a sergeant with the county sheriff's office for 23 years. His grandfather had been a state trooper. Law enforcement wasn't just a career in the Knox family. It was identity, legacy, expectation. Tyler wore his badge the way some people wear their last name, with pride that bordered on entitlement. At 24, Knox was the youngest officer in Stonebrook's 2024 Spring Academy class. His instructors described him as eager but emotionally immature. His field training reports noted strong technical skills. He could recite penal codes, execute traffic stops by the book, and handle firearms with precision. But his interpersonal evaluations told a different story. One supervisor wrote, "Knox treats policing like a competition he's trying to win." Another wrote, "Knox treats policing like a competition he's trying to win." The academy graduated him anyway. Stonebrook Police Department was short-staffed, operating at 72% capacity after budget cuts and a wave of retirements. Warm bodies with clean backgrounds and passing scores were prioritized over ideal temperament. Tyler Knox received his badge on a Friday. By Monday morning, he was patrolling alone. His assignment, downtown quality of life enforcement. That meant monitoring parks, transit hubs, and commercial districts for violations that fell into a gray area between criminal and civil: loitering, panhandling, public intoxication, sleeping in unauthorized areas. It was a role that required discretion, compassion, and the ability to distinguish between someone causing harm and someone simply existing in public space while poor, mentally ill, or unhoused. Tyler Knox possessed none of those qualities. What Knox didn't know, what almost no one in the department knew, was that Stonebrook Police Department had been running undercover integrity evaluations for the past 18 months. The program had been quietly implemented after a series of excessive force complaints and a Department of Justice consent decree that mandated reforms in accountability and training. Every 2 weeks, Internal Affairs deployed clothes officers into scenarios designed to test judgment, de-escalation skills, and compassion. Sometimes it was a staged domestic dispute. Sometimes it was a traffic stop with an actor playing an aggressive driver. Sometimes it was exactly what happened that Tuesday morning. A senior officer disguised as a vulnerable civilian placed in a public location waiting to see how patrol officers would respond. The tests weren't traps, they were mirrors. Officers who approached with professionalism, offered resources, and treated people with dignity passed without ever knowing they'd been evaluated. Officers who defaulted to intimidation, mockery, or force revealed exactly who they were when they thought no one important was watching. Only 3 people knew the schedule: the chief of police, the deputy chief of operations, and the head of internal affairs. Rookie officers were prioritized for testing because the department had learned a hard truth. Bad habits formed early were nearly impossible to break later. Tyler Knox's test was scheduled for April 16th at 7:30 a.m. in Stonebrook City Park.
Captain Elijah Ward was 52 years old and had spent the last 11 years running internal affairs for Stonebrook PD. Before that, he'd worked narcotics, gang enforcement, and homicide. He'd been shot twice, decorated 4 times, and respected universally. Not because he was soft, but because he was fair. Ward didn't play politics. He didn't cover for bad cops. He investigated complaints with the same rigor whether they involved a rookie or a deputy chief, and he'd personally recommended termination for 17 officers during his tenure. Ward was also black. That detail mattered because it shaped how he understood the stakes of integrity testing. He knew what it felt like to be profiled, to be treated as suspicious simply for existing in certain spaces. He knew the difference between an officer who genuinely couldn't tell the difference between a threat and a person, and an officer who simply didn't care. On the morning of April 16th, Ward arrived at Stonebrook City Park at 6:45 a.m. He wore layers of weathered clothing, a faded brown jacket with a torn pocket, dark jeans stained at the knees, scuffed work boots with the laces frayed. His graying hair was unkempt. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. A worn canvas backpack sat beside him on the bench, the kind you'd see at a thrift store or a shelter donation bin. He looked tired. He looked forgotten. He looked exactly like the kind of person some officers believed didn't deserve courtesy. The bench he chose was painted bright blue, positioned along the main walking path near the park's east entrance. It faced a small pond where ducks gathered in the mornings. Joggers passed every few minutes. Dog walkers, early commuters cutting through on their way to the bus stop. The park was peaceful, bathed in soft daylight that filtered through oak trees just beginning to bloom. Ward sat with his head tilted back, eyes half closed, posture suggesting exhaustion rather than aggression. His body language was deliberately non-threatening. He wasn't drinking, he wasn't shouting, he wasn't bothering anyone. He was simply sitting, resting, existing in a public park during hours when the park was legally open to everyone. 3 surveillance cameras monitored the area. Internal Affairs had positioned 2 additional plainclothes officers nearby, one disguised as a jogger, another sitting in a parked car with a clear sightline. Ward's Bodycam was concealed inside the canvas backpack, lens angled toward the bench. Every angle was covered. Every word would be recorded. Every action would be documented. At 7:41 a.m., Officer Tyler Knox's patrol car pulled into the parking lot. Stonebrook City Park covered 42 acres of green space in the heart of downtown. It had been designed in the 1920s as a refuge from urban density. Winding paths, open lawns, clusters of trees, a central fountain that ran from April through October. By 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, the park belonged to the early risers. A woman in neon running shoes jogged past Ward's bench, earbuds in, barely glancing his direction. An older man walked a golden retriever that stopped to sniff the grass near the pond. A teenager on a skateboard carved lazy circles around the fountain, waiting for his school bus. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and damp earth. Birds called from the branches overhead. The fountain's water created a low, steady hum. It was the kind of morning that made you believe the world could be gentle. Ward heard Knox's patrol car before he saw it. The engine idled louder than necessary as it rolled slowly along the service road that curved through the park. Ward didn't turn his head. He kept his eyes half closed, his breathing slow and even, his posture suggesting someone too exhausted to care about much beyond the next few minutes of rest. The car stopped 30 feet away. Ward heard the door open, heard boots hit pavement, heard the deliberate, unhurried steps of someone who believed they owned the space they walked through.
Knox approached the bench with his chest out, shoulders squared, one hand resting on his duty belt near his radio. His body cam activated automatically when he exited the vehicle, a small red light blinking once before settling into steady recording mode. The camera captured everything from Knox's perspective, The bright blue bench, the canvas backpack, the man in worn clothing sitting motionless in the morning light. Knox stopped 6 feet away and studied Ward for several seconds. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were already making assessments, drawing conclusions, deciding who this person was and whether they deserved respect. Ward clocked him instantly, noticed the rookie confidence, the slight swagger, the way Knox stood like he was waiting for applause. Ward had seen 1,000 officers like this. Young men who believed authority was something you performed rather than something you earned. Men who mistook cruelty for strength and compliance for respect. The tension was already present, humming beneath the surface like voltage waiting for connection. Knox shifted his weight, cleared his throat, and spoke. What do you think Knox's real issue is? Ego, bias, or the pressure of proving himself? Knox's voice cut through the morning quiet, sharp and performative. Wake up, buddy. Sleeping out here will land you in jail today. Ward didn't move immediately. He let the words hang in the air for 3 seconds. Long enough for Knox to be uncomfortable. Long enough to establish that he wasn't going to respond to commands delivered like insults. Then he opened his eyes fully, turned his head slowly toward Knox, and spoke with the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty. I'm not hurting anybody, just trying to rest. His voice was measured, deliberate, and completely devoid of fear. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly where this was going and had already decided how it would end. Knox didn't hear the warning. He heard defiance. This ain't a hotel, man. You can't just camp out here whenever you feel like it. Knox stepped closer, narrowing the distance to 4 feet. His right hand moved from his belt to his hip, fingers drumming against his thigh, in a gesture that suggested impatience barely held in check. You got ID? Ward tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question from multiple angles. Am I being detained? Knox's jaw tightened. Don't start with that legal stuff. I'm asking you a simple question. Do you have identification? And I'm asking you a simple question. Am I being detained or am I free to go? Knox took another step forward. Now he was 3 feet away, looming over Ward, using his height and proximity as tools of intimidation. His body cam captured the angle perfectly, Knox's shadow falling across Ward's face, the physical imbalance, the deliberate invasion of personal space.
Ward didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give Knox the reaction he was fishing for. He simply sat, hands resting on his knees, expression calm, and said, I'm not required to provide identification unless you have reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime. Have I committed a crime, officer? Knox's face flushed. His hand moved to his radio. You're about 2 seconds away from finding out what obstruction looks like. Obstruction, Ward repeated, slowly, as if tasting the word. For sitting on a bench in a public park during open hours. Interesting interpretation of the law. Knox's breathing quickened. His fingers twitched near his belt. The body cam captured his hand hovering near his taser, the yellow casing visible in the frame for just a moment before he caught himself and adjusted his stance. You think you're smart? Knox said, his voice dropping into something colder, meaner. You think because you know a couple legal terms you can sit here and waste my time? I'm not wasting your time, Ward said evenly. You approached me. I was sitting here quietly. You're the one who decided this needed to be a confrontation. Knox's hand went back to his taser. This time, he didn't move it away. The escalation. Stand up, Knox ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Stand up right now. Ward didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Knox's face, reading every micro-expression, cataloging every tell. He'd been a cop long enough to recognize the signs: elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, pupils dilated with adrenaline. Knox was spiraling, feeding his own anger, building to something he thought would prove his authority. I said stand up. Knox's voice cracked slightly, betraying the edge of panic beneath the aggression. He was losing control of the situation and couldn't figure out why. The man on the bench wasn't running, wasn't fighting, wasn't even raising his voice. But somehow, Knox felt like he was the one being cornered. Am I under arrest? Ward asked,
his tone still maddeningly calm. "You're about to be if you don't—" "On what charge?" Knox closed around the grip of his taser. "Trespassing, obstruction, disorderly conduct, pick one." "I'm sitting on a public bench in a public park during daylight hours. None of those charges would survive 10 minutes in court, and you know it." "I don't give a damn what you think you know," Knox shouted, his composure finally shattering. His hand pulled the taser halfway out of its holster, yellow plastic gleaming in the morning sun. "You're gonna stand up, you're gonna show me your ID, and you're gonna do it right now, or I swear to God—" "Or what?" Ward interrupted, his voice cutting through Knox's tirade like a blade. "You'll tase a man for sitting on a bench? You'll arrest someone for exercising their constitutional rights? Is that the kind of officer you want to be?"
Knox's entire body was trembling now, caught between the urge to escalate and the faint, distant alarm bell ringing in the back of his mind that told him something about this didn't feel right. But his pride, his ego, his desperate need to win this confrontation drowned out that warning. "Get the hell up!" Knox roared, his face inches from Ward's now, spittle flying with the force of his words. "You think I'm playing?" The jogger who'd passed earlier had stopped 30 feet away, phone out, recording. The man with the golden retriever had frozen mid-step, staring. The teenager on the skateboard had abandoned his board and was watching with wide eyes. Knox didn't notice any of them. His entire world had narrowed to the man on the bench who refused to be intimidated, refused to comply, refused to give him the victory he thought he deserved. Ward looked up at Knox. His expression shifted, not to fear, not to anger, but to something harder, something final. "Glad you finally showed your true colors," Ward said quietly. He reached into his jacket. Knox's hand flew to his taser, yanking it free, his finger on the trigger, Bodycam capturing every millisecond of the movement. And then Ward pulled out a gold badge. Not a wallet, not a weapon, not anything Knox's panicked mind had imagined. A badge. Gold. Engraved. Official. Ward's held it directly into the Bodycam's frame, angling it so the lens caught every detail. The shield, the eagle, the words stamped across the metal in bold letters. Ward's voice dropped to something quiet, measured, and devastating. "Undercover police chief, congratulations, you're fired." The collapse. Knox's face went white, not pale, white, the kind of bloodless white that happens when your brain suddenly understands that everything you thought was true is actually a catastrophic mistake. His hand, still holding the taser, began to shake. The weapon dipped, then dropped to his side, hanging useless from fingers that had gone numb. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes, wide, frantic, disbelieving, locked onto the badge, then flicked to Ward's face, then back to the badge, as if staring harder might somehow change what he was seeing. Knox's voice cracked. I didn't—" Ward stood slowly, deliberately, pocketing the badge and stepping past Knox without another word. His movement was unhurried, almost casual, the kind of calm that comes from having complete control over the situation and zero doubt about the outcome.
Knox turned, stumbling slightly, watching Ward walk toward the park entrance. "Sir, wait, I can explain." Ward didn't turn around. He pulled a radio from inside his jacket, a real radio, department issued, not the civilian prop Knox had assumed he didn't have, and keyed the mic. "Command, this is Captain Ward. Integrity test complete. Requesting supervisor response to Stonebrook City Park East entrance. Officer requires immediate removal from duty." His voice was professional, clinical, empty of emotion. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. He was simply reporting facts, the way you'd report a malfunctioning piece of equipment that needed to be taken offline. Knox's legs buckled. He caught himself against the bench, body cam shaking with the movement, frame wobbling as he fought to stay upright. His breathing came in short, rapid gasps. His hands trembled so badly he had to clasp them together to stop the shaking. The jogger with the phone was still recording. The man with the dog stood frozen,
mouth slightly open. The teenager whispered something to someone on his phone, voice hushed and awed. "Dude, you're not gonna believe what just happened." Knox tried to speak again. "Captain, please, I thought—" Ward finally stopped walking. He turned, looked back at Knox with an expression that held no sympathy, no forgiveness, nothing but the cold assessment of someone who'd seen exactly what he needed to see. "You thought he was powerless. You thought he was someone you could treat however you wanted because nobody would care. That's the problem, Officer Knox. That's always been the problem." He turned and kept walking. Knox sank onto the bench, the same bright blue bench where Ward had been sitting moments earlier, and buried his face in his hands. The Bodycam kept recording. The birds kept singing. The fountain kept running. And Tyler Knox's career, all 6 weeks of it, was over.
2 patrol cars arrived within 4 minutes. Sergeant Rachel Odom and Sergeant Marcus Tillman, both 15-year veterans, both aware of the integrity testing program's existence, even if they didn't know the schedule. They stepped out of their vehicles with expressions that told Knox everything he needed to know. This wasn't a rescue. This was a retrieval. Odom approached first. She was 42, compact and no-nonsense, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd worked with Knox during his field training rotation and had flagged him then for attitude issues. Her notes had been ignored. "Officer Knox," she said, her voice flat and official, "I need your service weapon, your badge, and your body cam, right now." Knox looked up, his face streaked with tears. He hadn't realized he'd been crying. "Sergeant, I didn't know—" "Weapon, badge, camera." Odom's hand extended, palm up, finger steady. "This isn't a conversation." Knox's hands fumbled with his duty belt. He unholstered his Glock 19 with shaking fingers, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed it over, grip first. Then his badge, the metal still warm from his body heat. Then the body cam, its red light still blinking, still recording the moment of his professional execution. Odom took each item without comment and passed them to Tillman, who placed them in evidence bags with the kind of clinical precision that made the whole scene feel like a crime scene, which, in a way, it was. "Stand up. You're going to walk to Sergeant Tillman's vehicle. You're going to sit in the back seat. You're not under arrest, but you're not free to leave. Internal Affairs is en route. Do you understand?" Knox nodded, mute, broken. "I need verbal confirmation, Officer Knox." "I understand," he whispered. Tillman opened the rear door of his patrol car. Knox climbed in, moving like someone in a dream, slow, disconnected, unable to fully process what was happening. The door closed with a heavy thunk that sounded final. Odom keyed her radio. "Dispatch, scene secured, subject contained, awaiting IA. The investigation begins." Captain Ward had moved to the park's east entrance, standing beneath an oak tree with his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with the detached focus of someone conducting a performance review. 2 plainclothes internal affairs investigators, Detective Lisa Huang and Detective Jerome Foster, had emerged from their observation positions and were now coordinating witness interviews. Huang approached the jogger who'd been recording. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Huang with Internal Affairs. I understand you witnessed the interaction between the officer and the individual on the bench. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" The jogger, mid-30s, wearing a fitness tracker and expensive running shoes, nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. I recorded the whole thing. That cop was completely out of line. The man on the bench wasn't doing anything wrong, and the officer just kept escalating. It was like he wanted a confrontation." "Can you send me that video?" Huang handed her a card with an encrypted submission portal. "We'll need it for the investigation file." "Already uploading it," the jogger said, tapping her phone. "I've seen too many videos of cops abusing people. I'm not letting this one disappear." Foster was interviewing the man with the golden retriever, whose statement mirrored the jogger's. I've been walking my dog in this park for 8 years. I've seen people sleeping on benches, and I've seen cops handle it a dozen different ways. Most of them just ask if the person needs help or tell them about shelter resources. I've never seen one go full aggro like that. It was disturbing. The teenager with the skateboard had called 3 friends, all of whom were now standing near the fountain, phones out, posting clips to social media with captions like, "Cop threatens homeless man who turns out to be undercover chief," and "Instant karma." The story was already spreading. Ward pulled out his department-issued phone and opened a secure note-taking app. He began typing his preliminary report, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Integrity test evaluation. Officer Tyler Knox, number 4475. Date, April 16th, 2024. Time, 0748 to 0758. Location, Stonebrook City Park, East Entrance. Test scenario. Vulnerable civilian in public space. Homeless presentation. Evaluator. Captain E. Ward, Internal Affairs. Summary. Officer Knox approached test subject with immediate hostility. No offer of assistance. No attempt to determine need for services. Defaulted to intimidation tactics within 30 seconds of contact. Escalated to threats of arrest and physical force despite subject's calm demeanor and legal compliance. Drew taser in response to non-threatening civilian exercising constitutional rights. Displayed clear bias indicators in language and body language. Failed to recognize de-escalation opportunities. Demonstrated fundamental unsuitability for field duty. Recommendation: immediate termination. Psychological evaluation required before any future law enforcement employment. Flagged for post-decertification review. Ward attached the Bodycam footage, the surveillance camera footage from 3 angles, and the witness statements that were already pouring into the IA database. By the time he finished, the case file was airtight. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot. Deputy Chief of Operations Angela Martinez stepped out, followed by the department's lead attorney, Robert Chen. Both wore expressions that suggested they'd been expecting bad news, but were still disappointed by how bad it actually was. Martinez walked directly to Ward. "How bad?"
Ward handed her his phone, the preliminary report open on the screen. Martinez read in silence, her jaw tightening with each line. When she finished, she closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. 6 weeks, she said quietly. We gave him a badge 6 weeks ago. And this is who he was the entire time, Ward replied. We just caught it early. Chen looked toward the patrol car where Knox sat slumped in the back seat. He's going to try to appeal. Union will fight for him. Let them, Ward said. The footage speaks for itself. We've got body cam, surveillance, and 3 civilian witnesses, all corroborating the same narrative. He approached a peaceful person sitting in a public park and escalated to the point of drawing a weapon because the man wouldn't comply with unlawful orders. There's no defense. Martinez nodded slowly. I'll notify the chief. He'll want to handle the press conference personally. Good, because this needs to be loud. If Knox was willing to treat someone he thought was homeless like this, someone he thought had no power, no voice, no ability to fight back, imagine how he would have treated people once he felt comfortable, once he had tenure, once he had a union protecting him. Chen pulled out his tablet and began drafting termination paperwork. I'll have the separation documents ready within the hour. No severance, no recommendation. Badge surrendered, POST certification flagged. Martinez looked at Ward. You okay? Ward shrugged. I sat on a bench for 20 minutes. Knox is the one whose life just imploded. That's not what I asked. Ward was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been black in America for 52 years. I've been a cop for 28. I know what it's like to be on both sides of that interaction. So, yeah, I'm okay. But I'm also tired. Because this is the 4th rookie we've tested this year, and Knox is the 2nd one who failed this badly. That's not a training issue. That's a culture issue. Martinez didn't have a response for that, because Ward was right. The phone call. Inside the patrol car, Tyler Knox pulled out his personal cell phone with trembling hands. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the one labeled Dad and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Tyler? You at work?" Dad, I messed up." "What did you do?" There was this guy in the park. He looked homeless. I thought I was just trying to do my job, and..." "Tyler, what did you do?" He was internal affairs. It was a test. I didn't know. He had a badge, and I drew my taser, and now they're saying I'm..." "You drew on a superior officer?" His father's voice went cold, flat, the way it did when he was trying to control his anger. "You pulled a weapon on someone from internal affairs during an integrity test?"
Hey, step away from that car. We got reports of a stalker out here.
Sir, I'm doing my job.
Yeah? Doing what?
Officer, I need you to back up right now.
Who the hell you
To
think
the federal probation officer. Your body cam just captured you blowing an active investigation. Congratulations.
On a clear, quiet afternoon in Redwood Heights, a rookie officer made a mistake so reckless it detonated a federal investigation and nearly got an innocent man, a federal officer, killed. His body cam captured every second of it. The footage begins with a black man standing beside a parked sedan, watching a vehicle down the block with laser-focused attention. He's calm, controlled, working. But rookie officer Daniel Keene storms into frame, hyped and ready for a confrontation. "Hey, step away from that car! We got reports of a stalker out here!" Within seconds, Keene escalates, grabs for cuffs, and pushes a federal officer to the brink of blowing his cover. Then the man lifts a gold badge. "Federal probation officer, and your body cam just captured you blowing an active investigation." What happened next cost the department $7.9 million and ended Teen's career before it ever started. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit subscribe. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light.
Redwood Heights, a suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Sacramento, California. Mid-afternoon on a Wednesday in early September. The kind of day where the heat had broken, but the sun still felt warm. Where residential streets were quiet except for the occasional car passing. Where people were at work and children were still in school. Darius Cole, 38 years old, sat in his unmarked sedan parked on Maple Street, his eyes fixed on a house 3 doors down. He'd been there for 2 hours, maintaining visual surveillance on a gray Honda Civic parked in the driveway of that house. The car belonged to Trent Williams, a federal probationer who'd violated the terms of his supervised release by failing to report, cutting off his ankle monitor, and disappearing for 3 weeks. Darius was a federal probation officer with the U.S. Probation and Pretrial Services Office. 12 years of experience supervising high-risk offenders, conducting investigations, and apprehending probation violators. He wasn't a glorified social worker checking in on people. He tracked dangerous individuals who demonstrated they couldn't follow court orders, who often had weapons violations, who sometimes chose to run rather than face consequences. That Wednesday, Darius was working a fugitive apprehension case. Trent Williams had been convicted of federal weapons trafficking, served 4 years, been released on supervised probation with strict conditions. When he cut his monitor and vanished, the court issued a violation warrant. The U.S. Marshals Service would eventually handle the actual arrest, but Darius's job was to locate Williams first, gather intelligence, confirm his whereabouts, establish patterns of movement. Through investigative work, interviewing associates, checking phone records, surveillance of known contacts, Darius had identified Williams's girlfriend's house in Redwood Heights as a likely location. He'd been conducting surveillance for 3 days, documenting vehicle arrivals and departures, noting patterns, waiting for Williams himself to appear. The surveillance was completely legal. Darius was on a public street, observing a house where a fugitive was believed to be hiding, gathering information for a federal warrant. He'd coordinated with his supervisor at the probation office, who knew his location, and checked in every 30 minutes via encrypted phone calls. He wore civilian clothes to avoid drawing attention. His federal credentials were in his jacket pocket. His service weapon was holstered at his hip, concealed. Everything was textbook professional surveillance, patient, methodical, documented, coordinated with proper authorities. He'd done this type of work hundreds of times over 12 years without incident. Locate the fugitive, confirm presence, coordinate with the marshals for safe apprehension. No drama, no mistakes. But Darius also knew that being a black man sitting in a car in a suburban neighborhood could trigger suspicion from residents who'd never consider that he might be law enforcement. He'd dealt with that reality his entire career, being questioned about his presence in spaces, having his legitimacy doubted, needing to prove he was a federal officer rather than being assumed to be one. That Wednesday afternoon, his awareness of that reality would prove justified. Would you have kept your cool the way Darius did if a cop rushed you during a federal operation? Officer Daniel Keene, 24 years old, had been with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department for exactly 3 months and 8 days. He'd graduated from the academy with passing but unremarkable scores, been assigned to patrol in the Redwood Heights sector after minimal field training, and was operating with the dangerous combination of minimal experience and maximum desire to prove himself.
His training file contained warnings that had been noted but not adequately addressed. Officer Keene demonstrates impulsive decision-making under pressure, tendency to escalate situations that could be resolved through communication, needs additional work on de-escalation and threat assessment, recommend extended field training before solo patrol authorization. But extended training cost money and time the department didn't want to invest. Keene met minimum qualifications, and bodies were needed on patrol. So he'd been cleared for solo duty with those warnings simply filed away. His 3 months of patrol had been frustrating for him. Mostly routine calls, minor traffic stops, paperwork, the mundane reality of police work. He wanted action, wanted to make arrests, wanted to prove he could handle dangerous situations. That desire made him see threats and opportunities for enforcement in situations where more experienced officers would recognize routine, legal activity. At 2:47 p.m. that Wednesday, dispatch transmitted a call. Suspicious person, Maple Street, Redwood Heights.
Caller reports male subject sitting in vehicle for extended period, watching houses, possible stalking behavior. The call had come from Mrs. Helen Morrison, a 71-year-old resident who'd noticed Darius's car parked on the street for hours, and it decided his presence must be criminal. She called 911 not because she'd observed any specific illegal activity, but because she'd seen a black man sitting in a car, and her brain had translated that into "doesn't belong here, must be up to something." Keene responded immediately, his adrenaline spiking at the possibility of actual police work. He didn't request backup, didn't call for additional information about the suspicious behavior, didn't consider that someone sitting in a car might have perfectly legal reasons for being there. He just responded fast, eager, ready for confrontation. His AXON body cam activated as he pulled his patrol car onto Maple Street and spotted Darius's sedan. The footage captured his rapid approach, his aggressive body language, his hand already positioned near his service weapon before he'd gathered any information about the situation. Who do you think is more dangerous, an inexperienced officer or an unchecked one? The footage that would later be viewed over 20 million times across various platforms showed exactly what happened when inexperience met bias, when eagerness overrode judgment, when assumptions replaced assessment. The bodycam perspective captured Darius from about 10 feet away, a black man in his late 30s, wearing jeans and a casual jacket, standing beside his sedan, his eyes focused down the street toward the Tardik house. His posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of someone working, observing, professional. His hands were visible at his sides. His demeanor communicated calm competence rather than furtive behavior. Everything about the scene should have suggested to a trained observer that this was law enforcement conducting surveillance. The unmarked but well-maintained vehicle, the professional attire, the focused observation rather than nervous scanning, the confidence of someone who had every right to be exactly where he was. But Keene didn't observe. He reacted.
The audio captured his approach. Rapid footsteps, elevated breathing, voice already raised before he'd assessed anything. "Hey, step away from that car. We got reports of a stalker out here." Darius turned slowly, his movements deliberate, his expression shifting from focused concentration to recognition of a problem. His voice was calm, controlled, carrying authority. "I'm working. Back up." The body cam captured Keene's response. Not de-escalation, not inquiry, but escalation. His hand moved toward his handcuffs. His shoulders squared. His voice took on edge. "Yeah? Doing what?" The footage showed the power dynamics clearly. Keene operating on adrenaline and assumption, Darius operating on 12 years of professional experience, and the knowledge that any wrong move could turn this encounter deadly. The rookie officer seeing defiance, the federal officer seeing danger. Darius's voice remained level but carried unmistakable warning. "Officer, I need you to back up right now." Keene interpreted this as challenge to his authority, rather than instruction from someone who understood the situation better than he did. "Who the hell you think you're—" The body cam captured the critical moment. Darius's hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into his jacket pocket. Keene's hand moved to his service weapon, his body tensing, preparing to draw on a federal officer conducting a lawful surveillance. Do you think Keene would have reacted the same way if Darius didn't fit the caller's bias? Then Darius's hand emerged from his jacket holding a black leather credential case. He flipped it open with practiced motion, holding it at eye level so the body cam would capture it clearly. A gold badge, unmistakably federal, with official identification beneath. Darius Cole, U.S. Probation Officer, District of Eastern California. Federal Probation Officer. The body cam captured Keene's face perfectly. The instant transition from aggressive confidence to dawning horror. His hand dropped from his weapon, his mouth open but no words came.
His eyes moved between the badge and Darius's face, his brain struggling to process that he'd just confronted a federal officer during an active investigation. Darius snapped the credential case closed, his voice carrying cold authority and barely controlled anger. Your body cam just captured you blowing an active investigation under active warrant. Congratulations. The surveillance was compromised. The house was now alerted to police presence, a marked patrol car parked conspicuously on the street, a uniformed officer confronting someone in what residents would interpret as an arrest situation. If Williams was inside or arrived and saw the scene, he'd recognize law enforcement and flee before the marshals could coordinate the arrest. 3 months of investigative work, weeks of surveillance, coordination with federal authorities, all potentially destroyed because a rookie officer saw a black man sitting in a car and decided that must be criminal. At this point, what would you have done if you were Darius?
Darius pulled out his encrypted phone and called his supervisor at the probation office, his voice tight with controlled fury. Sir, I've been confronted by a local deputy during surveillance. Cover is blown. Target house is alerted. We need to pull back and reassess. His supervisor's response was immediate. Coordinate with the marshals, document everything, and filed a formal interference complaint. The investigation was being compromised not by clever fugitive evasion, but by a rookie cop's racial profiling. The surveillance team that had been positioned at various points around the neighborhood, other probation officers, a marshal observing from a different vantage point, all had to abort. They pulled back, hoping Williams hadn't been tipped off yet, knowing they'd have to start surveillance planning from scratch. Williams, who'd been inside the girlfriend's house, had indeed noticed the commotion. He'd seen the patrol car, seen Keene confronting someone, recognized the signs of law enforcement activity. Within an hour, he'd slipped out the back, called a friend for pickup, and disappeared again. It would take another 5 weeks to relocate him, this time in a different state, requiring coordination with out-of-state probation offices and additional marshals' resources. All because Keene had seen a black man sitting in a car and assumed stalker rather than considering law enforcement. Keene stood frozen on the street, beginning to understand the magnitude of his error. Darius didn't stay to educate him. He had a compromised investigation to report, a supervisor to brief, and a fugitive who was now alerted and mobile. Keene returned to his patrol car and called his sergeant, his voice shaky. "Sarge, I've got a situation. I confronted someone on surveillance, and it turns out he's a federal probation officer. I think I messed up their case." Sergeant Linda Patterson arrived within 15 minutes, having coordinated with dispatch to get the full details. She was a 17-year veteran who'd seen rookie mistakes before, but recognized immediately that this one carried federal implications. She pulled Keene aside, her voice low but undismayably angry. Walked me through what happened. Keene's account revealed the cascade of failures. Received vague stalking call, arrived and saw a black man sitting in car watching houses, assumed criminal activity, confronted without gathering information, escalated when the subject told him to back off, nearly drew weapon, finally saw federal credentials. Did you run the plate before approaching? No, ma'am. Did you observe any actual illegal activity? He was just sitting there watching. Sitting in a car isn't illegal. Surveillance is legal. Did you consider he might be law enforcement? I didn't think. No, you didn't. You responded to a vague call from a resident who was probably just uncomfortable seeing a black man in the neighborhood, and you immediately assumed criminal activity, then confronted a federal officer conducting official duties, compromised his investigation, and nearly pulled your weapon on him. She'd already made the call to internal affairs before arriving. This wasn't just a rookie mistake. This was interference with federal law enforcement, racial profiling, and a near use of force against a federal officer. The consequences would extend far beyond department discipline. Do you think the department tried to protect Keene or themselves?
The U.S. Probation Office filed a formal complaint with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department within 24 hours, documenting the interference with federal operations. The complaint was copied to the U.S. Marshals Service, the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility, and the Civil Rights Division. The complaint detailed, Officer Keene confronted a federal officer during lawful surveillance. Officer Keene ignored identification and professional directives. Officer Keene's presence and marked vehicle compromised operational security. Officer Keene's actions resulted in fugitive being alerted and fleeing. Officer Keene's actions were based on racial profiling rather than legitimate suspicion. The department's internal affairs investigation ran parallel to the federal review. IA examined Keene's training file, his pattern of stops during his brief career, his response to the surveillance situation, and the body cam footage that captured everything. The analysis revealed concerning patterns. Keene had made 34 stops or investigations during his 3 months of solo patrol. 26 of those had involved black individuals, 76% of his enforcement actions in an area where black residents comprised 19% of the population. Of those 26 stops, 23 had resulted in no citation, arrest, or evidence of criminal activity. He was initiating contact with black people based on presence rather than behavior, generating false positives at a rate that proved racial bias. His supervisors had documented concerns during field training, tends to see threats where none exist, particularly with minority subjects. Needs coaching on when not to initiate contact. Recommend additional supervised time before solo clearance. All ignored because staffing needs outweighed proper training. The body cam footage became the centerpiece of both investigations. Federal reviewers watched it frame by frame, Keene's aggressive approach, Darius's calm professionalism, the escalation despite clear directives, the near weapon draw, the shocked realization when credentials were shown. One federal reviewer noted in the investigation file, Officer Keene approached a federal officer conducting lawful surveillance with immediate aggression based solely on the officer's race. His inability to recognize professional law enforcement behavior, combined with his escalation despite clear warnings, created a situation that could have resulted in violence against a federal officer. This represents both individual failure and institutional failure in training and supervision. The Sacramento County Sheriff faced a choice: take accountability immediately or fight the federal complaints and inevitable lawsuit. The body cam evidence made fighting impossible. The county's insurance carrier reviewed the footage and advised immediate settlement negotiations to avoid a trial that would generate even more negative publicity and likely result in a larger verdict. Keene was terminated within 6 weeks of the incident. The termination letter was direct. Officer Keene's actions on September 11th constituted gross misconduct. He confronted a federal officer conducting lawful duties based on racial profiling. He compromised a federal fugitive investigation. He escalated a situation that posed no actual threat. His pattern of stops demonstrates racial bias. He is unsuitable for law enforcement. His post-certification was revoked. His name was entered into the National Decertification Index. He would never work in law enforcement again in any state. Darius Cole filed a comprehensive federal civil rights lawsuit 9 months after the incident. The complaint named Officer Daniel Keene individually, his field training supervisor, and the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. The legal claims were extensive. Count 1. Interference with federal law enforcement. Keene's confrontation disrupted a lawful federal investigation, resulting in a fugitive fleeing and requiring additional resources to relocate and apprehend. Count 2. Fourth Amendment violation. Unlawful detention. Keene detained Darius without reasonable suspicion, based solely on a vague call and racial assumptions. Count 3. 14th Amendment violation. Racial discrimination. Keen's stop was motivated by racial bias, as evidenced by his pattern of disproportionate stops of black individuals. Count 4. Assault on a federal officer. Keen's near draw of his weapon while confronting a federal officer constituted assault under federal law. Count 5. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Being confronted at gunpoint while conducting federal duties, having his investigation compromised, and facing the possibility of violence caused severe distress. Count 6. Municipal liability. The department's inadequate training, ignored warnings about Keen's bias, and clearing him for duty, despite documented concerns, enabled the violations. The lawsuit sought $12 million in damages, acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and comprehensive reforms. The county settled for $7.9 million 13 months after the incident. The settlement included $7.9 million payment to Darius Cole, Officer Daniel Keen permanently barred from law enforcement, terminated, decertified, NDI entry ensuring unemployability in any law enforcement capacity, and comprehensive department reforms.
Mandatory training on recognizing federal law enforcement operations, protocol requiring verification of vague suspicious person calls before approach, extended field training to minimum 20 weeks with no exceptions, monthly analysis of stop patterns by race with immediate intervention for disparities, zero tolerance for stops based on resident discomfort rather than criminal behavior, federal liaison position to coordinate law enforcement operations, public acknowledgement, written statement acknowledging Keen's conduct violated federal law and constitutional rights, endangered a federal officer, and reflected institutional training failures. Has America actually learned, or just apologized loudly and changed nothing? The body cam footage from that September afternoon became more than just evidence in a lawsuit. It became a case study used in training programs across the country, a reference point in discussions about racial profiling, and a viral video viewed by over 20 million people. But Darius Cole's experience wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that federal law enforcement officers of color had been experiencing for years, rarely with such clear documentation. Black FBI agents had been stopped and detained while conducting surveillance in suburban neighborhoods, assumed to be suspicious rather than federal investigators. Black DEA agents had been confronted while executing warrants, mistaken for the criminals they were arresting. Black U.S. Marshals had been challenged at courthouses where they worked, assumed to be defendants rather than law enforcement. The pattern revealed something fundamental, that even federal badges, even professional conduct, even clear identification couldn't always override the assumption that black people in certain spaces must be criminal rather than legitimate. That racism operated so deeply that it could make a rookie cop see a stalker where a trained observer would recognize surveillance, see a threat where logic indicated a professional, see criminality where evidence showed law enforcement. Darius returned to his work with the probation office, though the incident left lasting impact professionally and personally. He'd spent 12 years building a reputation for effective professional supervision of high-risk offenders, having an operation compromised not by clever fugitive evasion, but by a rookie's racism became a permanent mark on his record. The fugitive, Trent Williams, was eventually located and arrested 5 weeks after the Maple Street incident, but only after additional federal resources had been expended to find him in Nevada. He was returned to federal custody to serve the remainder of his sentence, with additional time added for the probation violations. The cost of his extended freedom, financial, operational, public safety, stemmed directly from Keen's interference.
3 years after the incident, Darius reflected in an interview. I've supervised some of the most dangerous probationers in the system. I've tracked fugitives across state lines. I've conducted surveillance operations in high-crime areas. And I've never had an operation compromised by the people I was tracking. They understand the game. They know how to evade surveillance. But a 3-month rookie saw me sitting in a car and thought stalker, instead of noticing everything that would have told him I was law enforcement? That's not a training failure. That's a society failure. It's what happens when black people are presumed criminal in any context until we prove otherwise.
The reforms implemented in Sacramento County showed measurable results. Stop disparities decreased by 58% in the first year after the new protocols were implemented. The federal liaison position prevented 3 potential confrontations with federal officers in the following 18 months by ensuring proper coordination. Officers showing concerning stop patterns were identified and retrained before serious violations occurred. But the broader lesson extended beyond one department's reforms. The incident forced a national conversation, again, about how racial bias operates in law enforcement, how assumptions override evidence, how black professionals doing their jobs can still be presumed criminal even while conducting lawful surveillance for their own protection. The Bodycam footage remains online, a permanent record of what happens when bias meets authority. Keene's aggressive approach, Darius's professional composure, the escalation, the near violence, the shocked realization, the $7.9 million price tag. The video serves as both warning and evidence. Warning about what happens when departments clear unsuitable officers for duty. Evidence that accountability is possible when violations are documented with perfect clarity. But it also serves as a reminder that no achievement, no badge, no federal authority fully protects black professionals from being presumed criminal. The Darius Cole, 12-year federal officer, experienced investigator, professional conducting lawful surveillance, could be treated as a stalker simply for sitting in a car while black. Assumptions cost lives. In this case, they cost a career, a federal investigation, and the county nearly $8 million. But the real cost is measured in the cumulative weight of being presumed guilty, the exhaustion of having to prove legitimacy, the knowledge that even federal credentials can't always override racial assumptions.
Afternoon, sir. We got reports of a gang member in the area.
Okay, so why me?
Because I said so. ID now.
Officer, you're making a mistake.
You will be detained if you speak one more time.
U.S. Marshal leading a fugitive arrest 2 blocks from here.
Oh boy.
Your body cam just recorded the end of your career.
On a quiet spring morning in Brook Hill Estates, a rookie officer made a mistake that would derail $1 million federal operation and cost the city far more than his entire annual budget. Officer Tyler Briggs, 22 years old, barely 5 weeks out of the academy, had been patrolling a residential area after a vague report of suspicious gang activity. At 9:47 a.m., his body camera captured him sprinting toward a black man in tactical pants and a dark jacket, standing calmly beside an unmarked SUV. Briggs barked orders, shouted about detaining a possible gang member, and demanded ID with trembling bravado. What he didn't know, what he didn't bother to assess, is that the man he confronted was a U.S. Marshal conducting a covert fugitive arrest operation only 2 blocks away. Within seconds, Briggs's assumptions, adrenaline, and unchecked bias would trigger a scandal, compromise a high-risk federal mission, and end with a lawsuit that reshaped the department. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit subscribe. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light.
Brook Hill Estates, a middle-class residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Tree-lined streets, single-family homes with small yards, the kind of area where people know their neighbors and take pride in maintaining their properties. Morning on a Tuesday in early May meant school buses, people leaving for work, the normal rhythm of suburban life. Deputy U.S. Marshal Darius Thompson, 38 years old, stood beside his unmarked black Chevrolet Suburban at 9:47 a.m., 2 blocks from a house where a federal fugitive was believed to be hiding. Darius wore tactical pants, a dark blue jacket with police printed on the back in small yellow letters, and a radio earpiece. His federal credentials were clipped to his belt, clearly visible. He was coordinating the final positioning of his fugitive task force. 6 other federal agents positioned at strategic points around the target house, preparing for a high-risk arrest. The fugitive, Marcus Williams, was wanted on federal charges: armed robbery of a credit union, assault on a federal officer during his initial escape, and weapons trafficking.
He was considered armed and extremely dangerous. The U.S. Marshal Service had tracked him for 3 months across 4 states before finally locating him at his girlfriend's house in Brook Hill Estates. The operation had taken weeks of surveillance, coordination with local law enforcement command, and careful planning to minimize risk to civilians in the residential neighborhood. Darius had been with the Marshal Service for 12 years, previously served 8 years as military police in the Army, and specialized in tracking violent fugitives. He led a task force that had captured over 200 fugitives with a perfect safety record, no civilian injuries, no officer casualties, methodical and professional operations that prioritized public safety. That morning, he was doing exactly what he'd done hundreds of times before, coordinating final positions via encrypted radio, confirming sight lines, ensuring all team members understood the arrest plan. His SUV was parked on a residential street with a clear view of the target house, 2 blocks away. His posture was relaxed and alert, his movements deliberate and calm. Everything about his presence communicated law enforcement professional, if you knew what to look for. Officer Tyler Briggs didn't know what to look for. Briggs was 22 years old, 5 weeks removed from police academy graduation, assigned to routine patrol in the Brook Hill Estates sector. His training evaluations had included concerning notes. Officer Briggs demonstrates excessive enthusiasm that sometimes manifests as reckless urgency, tends to escalate situations based on limited information, would benefit from additional mentoring on threat assessment and de-escalation. But the department was understaffed, and Briggs met minimum qualifications, so he'd been cleared for solo patrol.
That morning, Briggs had received a vague dispatch call. Possible suspicious activity, Brook Hill Estates area. Caller reports seeing someone in gang clothing loitering near vehicles. No specific location, no description beyond gang clothing, no reported crime. Just a resident's unease translated into a dispatch call that would derail a federal operation. Briggs drove through the neighborhood looking for anything that matched his understanding of gang clothing, which essentially meant any black person dressed casually. When he saw Darius standing beside the unmarked SUV wearing tactical pants and a dark jacket, his immediate thought wasn't law enforcement conducting an operation. His thought was gang member casing vehicles, and that assumption drove everything that followed. Briggs' Axon Bodycam activated as he pulled his patrol car to a quick stop and exited fast, his movements hurried and aggressive. The footage captured his sprint across the street, his breathing rapid with adrenaline, his hand already moving toward his service weapon. "Hey, don't move! Put your hands where I can see them!" Darius turned, his expression shifting from focused concentration to immediate recognition of a problem. After 12 years as a federal agent, he knew instantly what was happening. A rookie officer who'd seen a black man and made assumptions without gathering information. Darius's hands moved slowly to a neutral position at his sides, palms visible. "Officer, I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Darius Thompson. I'm conducting a federal fugitive apprehension operation 2 blocks from this location. My credentials are on my belt. My radio traffic is encrypted federal communications. I need you to step back immediately." But Briggs wasn't listening. He was operating on adrenaline and assumption, his training failure manifesting as doubling down rather than pausing to assess. "I said don't move. You're being detained for investigation." "Officer, look at my jacket. It says police on the back. Look at my belt. Federal credentials clearly visible. I'm a U.S. Marshal. You need to check with your dispatch about federal operations in this area before you compromise an active arrest." Briggs circled slightly, saw the credentials holder, saw the police marking on the jacket. But instead of immediately recognizing his error, his rookie ego took over. "Anyone can get tactical gear. Show me your ID with your hands behind your back." Darius's voice remained calm but carried unmistakable authority and warning now. I'm not putting my hands behind my back. I'm a federal agent coordinating a high-risk fugitive apprehension operation 2 blocks from this location. My Europe presence here is being broadcast on an unsecured radio channel that could alert our target. You need to leave this area immediately and contact your supervisor." The Bodycam captured what happened next with perfect clarity. Briggs pulled out his handcuffs and stepped forward. "Turn around, now. You're under arrest for suspicious activity and failure to comply." Darius pulled his federal credentials from his belt and held them up, the gold marshal's badge catching sunlight, the identification card clearly visible with his photo, name, and official designation. Deputy U.S. Marshal, federal badge, federal operation. You are compromising a fugitive apprehension and committing obstruction of justice. Briggs froze, his face going pale as his brain finally processed what he was seeing. But the damage was done. Darius's encrypted radio crackled with voices from other team members. "Marshal Thompson, we have movement at the target house. Suspect may be aware of police presence. Do we proceed or abort?" If you saw this confrontation on Bodycam with zero context, what would your first reaction be?
The Bodycam footage that would later be released showed the exact moment Darius's careful operation unraveled. His calm professional demeanor cracking slightly as he realized a rookie cop's assumptions had just endangered a high-risk federal arrest, put his team at risk, and potentially allowed an armed fugitive to become aware of law enforcement presence. Darius Thompson had joined the U.S. Marshals Service at age 26, immediately after completing his military service. He'd grown up in Cleveland, joined the Army at 18, served as military police in Iraq and Afghanistan, earned commendations for his tactical judgment and calm under pressure. When he returned stateside, the Marshals Service recruited him specifically for fugitive apprehension, the dangerous, high-skill work of tracking and capturing people who demonstrated willingness to run, hide, and often fight rather than face justice. Over 12 years, he'd become one of the service's most respected deputies. He tracked fugitives across international borders, coordinated multi-agency task forces, trained newer agents on tactical operations. His personnel file was filled with commendations, exemplary judgment in high-pressure situations, outstanding leadership during complex operations, demonstrates perfect balance of aggression and caution required for fugitive work. The operation that morning was typical of his assignments. A violent fugitive who'd evaded capture for months, finally located through patient investigative work and surveillance. Marcus Williams, the target, had robbed a credit union in Cincinnati 3 months earlier, fled during the initial police response, assaulted a pursuing officer with his vehicle, and disappeared. Federal warrants were issued. The Marshals Service took over the investigation. Darius's team had tracked Williams through associates, family members, and finally to his girlfriend's house in Brookhill Estates. They'd spent 2 weeks confirming he was there, documenting his patterns, identifying the safest time and approach for arrest. They'd coordinated with Columbus PD Command, not street-level patrol, but command staff who understood the need for operational security and the importance of not broadcasting federal actions on open radio channels. The operation that morning was textbook. 6 agents positioned around the house, 2 at the front door with a battering ram, 2 covering the back exit, 2 in vehicles ready to pursue if Williams fled. Darius was command, coordinating from a position with clear line of sight, maintaining radio contact, ready to call the arrest when all positions confirmed ready.
They were 30 seconds from executing the arrest warrant when Officer Tyler Briggs pulled up behind Darius's SUV and began shouting orders. The encrypted radio traffic captured the immediate impact. "Command, we have local patrol on your position. Subject is moving inside the house. Command, do we hold or proceed? Command, suspect just looked out front window. He's seen the patrol car." Darius had to make a split-second decision while dealing with Briggs, continue the operation with their cover potentially blown, risking a shootout in a residential neighborhood if Williams decided to fight, or abort, regroup, hope Williams didn't flee before they could reset.
He made the call. All units, hold position. Do not approach target house. Local patrol has compromised operational security. We abort and regroup. The disappointment in his voice was audible even through the radio transmission. 3 months of investigation, 2 weeks of surveillance, perfect positioning, all of it disrupted because a rookie cop saw a black man in tactical clothing and assumed gang member rather than federal agent. By the time Briggs finally understood what he'd done, federal credentials in hand, radio traffic making it clear this was a coordinated law enforcement operation, Williams had seen the patrol car, recognized law enforcement presence, and begun preparing to flee. Darius's team managed to prevent this escape by quickly repositioning, but the arrest became far more dangerous than planned, requiring a forced entry and physical struggle that injured one agent and resulted in property damage to the girlfriend's house. All of it could have been avoided if Briggs had taken 30 seconds to assess the situation before confronting Darius. Have you ever seen a situation where one small mistake caused huge consequences?
Officer Tyler Briggs stood frozen in the street, Darius's federal credentials in his hands, the weight of his error settling over him like physical pressure. He'd been on the force 5 weeks. In those 5 weeks, he'd made 17 stops. 14 of those stops had involved black individuals. 13 of those stops had yielded no citations, arrests, or evidence of criminal activity. Briggs hadn't been trained to recognize those numbers as problematic. He'd been trained to trust his instincts, to respond to suspicious behavior, to prioritize officer safety above de-escalation. But his instincts were shaped by bias he'd never examined. His definition of suspicious was influenced by stereotypes he'd absorbed from media, culture, and the unspoken messages about who poses threats and who deserves scrutiny. When he'd received the dispatch call about gang clothing, he'd immediately formed a mental image. Young black man in baggy clothes, possibly armed, probably engaged in criminal activity. That image was so firmly established in his mind that when he saw Darius, a 38-year-old federal agent in professional tactical gear, his brain had simply projected the stereotype onto reality. The Bodycam footage captured his breathing, rapid, shallow, adrenaline-fueled. Captured his hand movements, jerky, uncertain, compensating for inexperience with aggression. Captured his voice, trying to sound authoritative, but coming across as shaky and uncertain. Everything about his physical presence communicated rookie officer trying to project confidence he didn't actually possess. His training had taught him to give commands forcefully, to control situations through dominance, to treat non-compliance as resistance. But his training hadn't adequately taught him when not to engage, how to assess before acting, or how to recognize when his assumptions might be wrong. The tactical gear should have been his first clue. Professionals wear tactical pants and jackets with police markings. The unmarked SUV should have been second. Expensive vehicle, federal plates visible if he'd bothered to look. The calm demeanor should have been third. Someone engaged in criminal activity doesn't typically stand casually in broad daylight on a residential street. The credentials visible on Darius's belt should have been fourth. But Briggs had bypassed all those clues because his first thought, black man in this neighborhood must be suspicious, had overridden his ability to gather and process information. Now he stood in the street, watching federal agents execute a now compromised arrest 2 blocks away, listening to radio traffic describing how the operation he'd disrupted was proceeding with elevated risk, and beginning to understand that his career in law enforcement would likely be measured in days rather than years. Darius walked back to his SUV without another word to Briggs.
He had more important things to do than educate a rookie who just cost the Marshals Service months of investigative work and potentially put his team at risk. He pulled out his phone and called his supervisor at the Columbus field office. "Sir, we executed the Williams warrant. Subject in custody, one agent, minor injuries during struggle. Operation was compromised by local patrol officer who detained me during final positioning, broadcast our presence on open radio channels, and alerted the target. I need you to contact Columbus PD Command and initiate a formal complaint about interference with federal operations." Do you think rookies should have different rules when responding to vague or racially biased tips? Within 3 hours, Officer Tyler Briggs was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Within 6 hours, the Bodycam footage had been uploaded to secure servers and was being reviewed by Internal Affairs, the U.S. Marshals Service, and federal attorneys from the Department of Justice. Within 12 hours, the story had leaked to media outlets. Local cop disrupts federal fugitive arrest, detains U.S. Marshal. The Bodycam footage was damning in its clarity. It showed Briggs approaching at a sprint, shouting commands before gathering any information. It showed Darius immediately identifying himself as a federal agent. It showed Briggs ignoring that identification and attempting to arrest him anyway. It showed the exact moment the operation was compromised, captured in the background audio of encrypted radio traffic reporting suspect awareness of police presence. The U.S. Marshals Service filed a formal complaint with Columbus PD documenting the interference. The complaint detailed, "Officer Briggs initiated contact with a federal agent conducting official duties. Officer Briggs ignored visible credentials and clear identification. Officer Briggs's presence and use of marked patrol car alerted the fugitive target. Officer Briggs's actions forced the operation to proceed under compromised conditions. Officer Briggs's actions resulted in elevated risk to federal agents and civilians. One federal agent sustained injuries during the arrest that might have been preventable if the operation had proceeded as planned." The U.S. Marshals Service filed a formal complaint with Columbus PD, documenting the interference.
His training file showed the warnings that had been noted but not addressed. His field training officer's final evaluation had included, Officer Briggs would benefit from additional supervised patrol before solo assignment. He demonstrates tendency to act on assumptions rather than gathered facts. That recommendation had been overridden by staffing needs. The dispatch call that had sent Briggs to Brook Hill Estates that morning was traced and analyzed. An elderly white resident had called about suspicious gang activity, which turned out to be her description of seeing a black man in tactical clothing standing near vehicles. No crime reported, no specific behavior described beyond "looks suspicious." The dispatcher had logged it as routine suspicious person call without questioning whether the caller's perception of gang activity was based on actual evidence. The fugitive Williams had indeed become aware of police presence when he saw Briggs's marked patrol car pull up 2 blocks from his location. He'd immediately begun preparing to flee, grabbing a backpack with cash and a loaded handgun, heading toward the back door. The marshals had been forced to execute the arrest immediately rather than waiting for his girlfriend to leave the house as planned, resulting in the girlfriend being present during the forced entry, traumatizing her children who were home, and the physical struggle that injured an agent when Williams tried to fight his way past the entry team. All of that elevated risk, trauma, and injury stemmed directly from Briggs's interference. The Bodycam footage was released publicly through a Freedom of Information request filed by a journalist within a week. The video went viral immediately, viewed over 15 million times in the first 48 hours across various platforms. Comments reflected widespread outrage. Imagine being so racist you try to arrest a U.S. Marshal with his badge clearly visible. That rookie's entire career lasted 5 weeks. He saw a black man and his brain immediately thought gang member instead of noticing all the obvious signs of law enforcement. Federal agents do dangerous work.
Having to deal with rookie cops who can't control their bias makes it even more dangerous. Should body cam recordings always be released when police interfere with federal operations?
Darius Thompson filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit 8 weeks after the incident. The complaint named Officer Tyler Briggs individually, his field training supervisor who'd cleared him for solo duty despite documented concerns, and the Columbus Police Department. The legal claims were extensive. Count 1. Obstruction of federal law enforcement. Briggs interfered with a federal fugitive apprehension operation, compromising operational security and endangering federal agents. Count 2. Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful detention. Briggs detained Darius without reasonable suspicion, despite visible federal credentials and clear identification of official status. Count 3. 14th Amendment violation, racial discrimination. Briggs's stop was motivated by racial bias, as evidenced by his pattern of disproportionate stops of black individuals and his immediate assumption that a black man in tactical gear was a gang member rather than law enforcement. Count 4. Assault on a federal officer. Attempting to physically restrain a federal officer engaged in official duties constituted assault under federal law. Count 5. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Being detained and having a critical operation compromised caused significant professional and emotional harm. Count 6. Municipal liability. Columbus PD's inadequate training, failure to supervise Briggs properly, and pattern of ignoring documented concerns enabled the constitutional and federal law violations. The lawsuit sought $12 million in damages, termination of Officer Briggs, and comprehensive reforms to training, supervision, and stop pattern monitoring. The city's defense attorneys reviewed the evidence and quickly recognized they had no viable position. The body cam footage was indefensible. The operational damage to a federal investigation was documented. Briggs's stop pattern proved racial bias. His training file showed the department had ignored warning signs. Settlement negotiations began within 4 months. The city's initial offer was $2 million. Darius's attorneys rejected it, arguing that the settlement needed to reflect both the personal violation and the institutional failure that endangered a federal operation. The city increased to $5 million, still rejected. Finally, understanding that trial would likely result in an even larger verdict, plus extensive legal costs and continued negative publicity, the city agreed to settle for $8.5 million. The settlement included $8.5 million payment to Darius Thompson, Officer Tyler Briggs terminated for cause, post-certification revoked, National Decertification Index entry, and permanent bar from law enforcement employment. Comprehensive department reforms. All patrol officers required to check dispatch for federal operations before responding to vague suspicious person calls. Mandatory bias training quarterly with testing and accountability. Extended field training to minimum 16 weeks with no exceptions. Monthly review of stop patterns by race with supervisory intervention for statistical disparities. Zero tolerance policy for stops based solely on vague caller perceptions without specific criminal activity. Formal protocol for coordinating with federal law enforcement on operations in city jurisdiction. Public acknowledgement. Written statement acknowledging Briggs's conduct violated federal law and constitutional rights, endangered federal agents, and reflected training and supervision failures. Federal liaison position. Creation of new position coordinating federal-local operations to prevent future interference. The Columbus PD held a press conference announcing the settlement. The police chief stood at a podium, clearly uncomfortable, reading a prepared statement. The actions of Officer Tyler Briggs on May 7th were unacceptable and violated our department's standards.
His interference with the federal fugitive operation endangered lives and reflected failures in our training and supervision systems. We have implemented comprehensive reforms to ensure similar incidents do not occur. We extend our sincere apology to Deputy U.S. Marshal Thompson for this incident. The federal agencies involved issued their own statement. Law enforcement at all levels must work cooperatively to serve the public. Local officers must be trained to recognize and respect federal operations, particularly those involving dangerous fugitives. The incident in Columbus demonstrates what happens when training fails and bias operates unchecked. Officer Tyler Briggs, now 22 years old, with a 5-week law enforcement career destroyed, released no public statement. His attorney issued a brief comment. Officer Briggs regrets the incident and wishes Marshal Thompson well. The statement satisfied no one and was widely criticized as inadequate given the severity of his actions. The reforms implemented in Columbus showed immediate results. Officers completing the extended training program demonstrated significantly better judgment in stop decisions. The bias training with accountability measures reduced stop disparities by 52% in the first year. The early warning system identified and retrained officers showing concerning patterns before they escalated to serious violations.
Darius Thompson's case wasn't unique, just uniquely documented and uniquely consequential. Research and reporting over the years has revealed pattern after pattern of Black professionals being misidentified, challenged, or detained by officers who couldn't imagine they might be colleagues, authority figures, or simply citizens going about lawful business. Black firefighters arriving at emergency scenes have been stopped by police who assumed they were looters. Black federal agents conducting investigations have been questioned about their presence in buildings they were assigned to inspect. Black judges have been challenged entering their own courtrooms. Black military personnel in uniform have been stopped and questioned about their right to be on base. Black doctors have been prevented from providing emergency medical care because officers assumed they couldn't possibly be medical professionals. The pattern reveals something fundamental about how bias operates. It overrides evidence, ignores credentials, dismisses professional markers, and sees only skin color. A federal badge becomes possibly fake. Tactical gear becomes gang clothing. Calm professional demeanor becomes suspicious behavior. Darius continued his work with the Marshal Service, but the incident left lasting impact. He'd spent 12 years building a reputation for flawless operations, and having one compromised by a rookie's racism became part of his permanent record, not through any fault of his own, but through the failure of systems that cleared an unsuitable officer for patrol. 3 years after the incident, he reflected in an interview. I've arrested some of the most dangerous fugitives in the country. Our coordinated operations across international borders. I've never had an operation compromised by the people I was trying to apprehend. They're professionals in their own way. They know how to evade surveillance. But a 5-week rookie saw me and thought gang member, instead of noticing the federal badge, the tactical gear, the unmarked SUV with federal plates, the encrypted radio equipment. That's not a training failure. That's a bias failure, and it nearly got my team hurt. The Bodycam footage remains in training archives, used by police academies and federal law enforcement programs as an example of how assumptions destroy operations and violate rights. Briggs approaching at a sprint, Darius identifying himself immediately, Briggs ignoring visible credentials. The operation compromised, the settlement costing millions. The lesson should be obvious. Gather information before acting. Verify before confronting. Recognize that Black people in professional clothing might actually be professionals. Understand that federal agents come in all races. Know that assumptions cost careers, endanger operations, and violate rights. But the lesson has to be taught repeatedly because the bias is deeply embedded. Because officers are still being trained to see threats before humanity. Because systems still prioritize filling patrol cars over properly preparing the people who wear the uniforms. Because the cost of failure is borne by those who are assumed criminal until they prove otherwise. Why do so many officers see danger first and humanity second when the subject is black? If you believe these stories matter, if you think officers who compromise federal operations through racial bias should lose their badges permanently, hit that subscribe button. We're exposing how inadequate training and unchecked assumptions create federal incidents and million-dollar settlements. We're demanding accountability for officers who endanger federal agents through racial profiling. We're fighting for a system where black professionals don't have to defend their legitimacy to rookies who can't control their bias. This isn't about one officer or one marshal. It's about every black professional who's been treated as suspicious for doing their job, who's had to prove they belong in spaces they've earned the right to occupy.
Sir, this vehicle's being towed. You can't park here.
Officer, that's my spot.
Yeah, you wish. Back up.
Okay. What makes you think this car is illegally parked?
Because you don't look like you work here.
Chief Judge Marcus Ellison, and you just lost your job.
On a crisp October morning outside the Brookwood County Courthouse, a rookie officer made a mistake that would cost the city millions and destroy his own career before it ever began. Officer Ryan Kelton, 23 years old and barely 2 months out of the academy, had been assigned to courthouse parking enforcement, a task usually considered impossible to mess up. Yet at 8:12 a.m., his body camera captured him confronting a black man in a tailored navy suit standing beside a black sedan, parked in a clearly marked, reserved, judicial staff only space. Kelton insisted the vehicle was illegally parked and ordered a tow truck, speaking with the false authority of someone determined to prove he belonged in uniform. The man he confronted was Chief Judge Marcus Ellison, the highest-ranking judicial officer in the county, preparing to preside over a major sentencing hearing that morning. Within minutes, Kelton's arrogance, assumptions, and unchecked bias would trigger a scandal that ended in a $17 million settlement. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit subscribe. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light.
Brookwood County Courthouse sat at the center of downtown Brookwood, a mid-sized city in the upper Midwest with a population of about 250,000. The courthouse was an imposing structure, 5 stories of limestone and glass, built in the 1970s and renovated in 2015, housing 14 courtrooms, chambers for 12 judges, offices for prosecutors and public defenders, and administrative facilities for county legal services. The building operated on strict parking protocols. The front lot was designated for public visitors and court staff. The side lot, accessible through a security gate requiring keycard entry, was reserved exclusively for judicial officers, senior court administrators, and certain security personnel. Each space was clearly marked with signage indicating restrictions and specific role assignments. October 17th was a Thursday. The temperature was in the low 50s, the sky partly cloudy, the morning air crisp with the promise of autumn. The courthouse would be busy that day. 12 hearings scheduled, 3 jury trials in session, dozens of attorneys, witnesses, and defendants moving through security, conducting the daily business of justice. Chief Judge Marcus Ellison, 51 years old, arrived at the courthouse at 8:09 a.m. in his black BMW sedan. He'd been Chief Judge of Brookwood County for 3 years, appointed to the position after 17 years as a trial judge and 5 years before that as a prosecutor. He was the first black chief judge in the county's history, a distinction he carried with both pride and the weight of knowing that his conduct would be scrutinized more carefully than his predecessors. Marcus had been raised in Brookwood, attended public schools, earned his undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin, and graduated from Harvard Law School. He'd returned to Brookwood specifically to serve his community, turning down more lucrative offers from large firms to work as a public defender initially, then as a prosecutor before being appointed to the bench. He had a reputation for being fair, thorough, and uncompromising when it came to courtroom decorum and procedural integrity. That Thursday morning, he was preparing for a major sentencing hearing, a high-profile case involving public corruption that had drawn media attention for months. He needed to review final pre-sentencing reports, confirm legal precedents, and ensure his courtroom was ready for what would likely be an emotionally charged proceeding. He pulled into his assigned parking space, the one clearly marked Reserved, Chief Judge Marcus Ellison, in the judicial side lot. He'd parked in that exact spot every working day for 3 years. His keycard had opened the gate. His space was clearly designated. Everything about his presence there was legitimate, authorized, and routine. He stepped out of his car wearing a navy suit, white dress shirt, burgundy tie, his standard courtroom attire when not in robes. His briefcase sat on the back seat containing the sentencing files he'd been reviewing the night before. He stood beside his car for a moment, checking his phone for any last-minute messages from his clerk, the morning air cold enough to see his breath. That's when Officer Ryan Kelton approached.
Kelton was 23 years old, 2 months out of the police academy, assigned to courthouse security detail, a position typically given to rookies as a low-risk way to gain experience before patrol duties. His responsibilities included monitoring public entrances, assisting with security screening, and enforcing parking regulations in the public lot. The judicial lot was outside his assigned area, but he'd been walking the perimeter of the building when he noticed the black BMW. Kelton's academy evaluations had included concerning notes. Officer Kelton demonstrates confidence that occasionally exceeds his competence, tendency to assert authority in situations where patience would be more appropriate, would benefit from additional training on de-escalation and respectful communication. But he'd passed the minimum requirements, and the department needed officers, so he'd been cleared for duty. When Kelton saw Marcus standing beside the BMW in the judicial lot, his immediate thought wasn't judicial officer arriving for work. His thought was someone who doesn't belong here. And that assumption was shaped entirely by seeing a black man in a suit standing beside an expensive car in a restricted area. Kelton's Axon Bodycam activated as he approached, capturing everything from his perspective. His stride was purposeful, his posture rigid, in the way rookie officers often carry themselves when trying to project authority they don't yet naturally possess. "Sir, this vehicle is being towed. You can't park here." Marcus turned, his expression shifting from focused concentration to mild confusion. "I am aware it's restricted. That's my spot." Kelton actually laughed, a dismissive, condescending sound that the Bodycam captured clearly. "No, it's not. Back up, please." Marcus took a step forward, not aggressive, but genuinely puzzled. "Officer, what makes you think this car is illegally parked?" Kelton's response was immediate and damning. "Because you don't look like someone who works in this building." The statement hung in the air, its meaning unmistakable. Marcus's expression shifted, confusion giving way to recognition of exactly what was happening. He'd dealt with assumptions his entire life, had been questioned in spaces where he belonged countless times, but it still carried a sting when it came from someone wearing a badge. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly and pulled out a black leather credential wallet. He opened it and held it at eye level so Kelton could see clearly. Inside was his judicial identification card, Chief Judge Marcus Ellison, Brookwood County Circuit Court, complete with official seal, photo, and security hologram. Marcus's voice remained calm, controlled, but carried unmistakable authority. "Chief Judge Marcus Ellison, this is my courthouse, and that is my parking space." The Bodycam captured Kelton's face perfectly in that moment. The color draining, the eyes widening, the sudden realization that he'd just made a catastrophic error. His hand, which had been gesturing dismissively moments earlier, dropped to his side. But instead of immediately apologizing and retreating, Kelton's training failure and ego combined into a worse response. He'd already called the tow truck on his radio before approaching. Now he stood frozen, trying to figure out how to undo what he'd set in motion without admitting he'd been completely wrong from the beginning. If this moment happened to you, what would your reaction be? Let me know in the comments. Marcus stood quietly, watching Kelton process the situation, his patience wearing thin. After 17 years as a trial judge, he developed the ability to remain composed under pressure, but this was testing even his considerable restraint. He'd been questioned about belonging in his own courthouse, in his own parking space, while preparing for a major hearing, by someone who should have been focused on actual security concerns rather than making assumptions about who belonged where. "Officer, I need you to cancel that tow truck." Kelton found his voice, though it had lost all its earlier authority. Chief Judge, I apologize. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you made an assumption without gathering any information. The sign on this space clearly identifies it as mine. The gate to this lot requires judicial staff credentials. My vehicle has appropriate parking permits visible on the windshield. You had multiple pieces of information available that would have prevented this encounter, but you chose not to verify any of them." A tow truck pulled into the lot at that moment, having responded to Kelton's earlier call. The driver, recognizing the situation immediately when he saw the Chief Judge's parking sign and the judicial credentials visible in Marcus's hand, stopped his truck and waited, smart enough not to approach until he understood what was happening. Court staff arriving for their morning shifts began noticing the unusual scene: the Chief Judge standing beside his car, a young officer looking increasingly distressed, a tow truck idling nearby. Jennifer Chen, the Chief Judge's court clerk for the past 5 years, walked quickly over from the employee entrance. "Judge Ellison, is everything all right?" Marcus gestured toward Kelton. "This officer has called a tow truck to remove my vehicle from my assigned parking space." Chen's eyes went wide. She looked at Kelton, at the clearly marked space, at the tow truck, back to Kelton. "Officer, this is the Chief Judge. This has been his parking space for 3 years. What's going on?"
Kelton's face had gone from pale to red, embarrassment and panic competing. But instead of simply admitting his error, he tried to defend his actions. "I saw an unauthorized vehicle in the judicial lot. I was enforcing parking regulations." "Unauthorized?" Marcus's voice remained calm, but carried an edge now. "My credentials authorize my presence. My key card opened the gate. My parking permit is displayed. The signage identifies this as my space. On what basis did you determine I was unauthorized?" Kelton couldn't answer, because the only honest answer was the assumption that had driven his entire approach, that a black man, regardless of attire or credentials, couldn't possibly be the Chief Judge. More staff had gathered now, attracted by the unusual commotion. Court Security Supervisor Lieutenant David Martinez arrived, having been alerted by radio chatter about a situation in the judicial lot. He took in the scene instantly: the Chief Judge, the rookie officer, the tow truck, the growing crowd of witnesses. "Officer Kelton, what's happening here?" Kelton's voice was barely audible now. "Sir, I initiated contact regarding what I believe to be an illegally parked vehicle. The driver has identified himself as Chief Judge Ellison. I made an error in judgment." Martinez turned to Marcus. "Chief Judge, I apologize on behalf of courthouse security. Officer Kelton is new to his assignment. I'll be filing a full incident report and initiating an internal affairs review." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant, I appreciate that, but I want to be clear about what happened here. Your officer approached me based on an assumption about who I am rather than verification of facts readily available to him. He called a tow truck to remove my vehicle from my assigned space. And when I challenged his actions, his first instinct was to defend his judgment rather than admit error. That's not a training issue, that's a bias issue." At this point in the story, do you think the rookie should be suspended immediately or retrained? Comment your thoughts. Lieutenant Martinez was 48 years old, had been with courthouse security for 12 years, and had never dealt with anything like this before. Courthouse security incidents typically involved screening delays, unauthorized photography attempts, or occasional disruptive behavior by defendants or family members. Having a rookie officer attempt to tow the chief judge's car was unprecedented. He walked over to Kelton, his voice low but unmistakably angry. "Did you even read the sign on that parking space?" Kelton looked at the ground. "I saw someone I didn't recognize in the judicial lot. That's not what I asked. Did you read the sign?" "No, sir." Martinez pointed at the clearly visible signage, reserved, Chief Judge Marcus Ellison. The letters were large, professionally printed, impossible to miss for anyone actually looking. That sign has been there for 3 years. The gate requires credentials. The vehicle has proper permits. What made you think this was an unauthorized vehicle? Silence, because any answer Kelton gave would require acknowledging his bias. Martinez continued, his frustration evident. "You're assigned to the public entrance. The judicial lot is not your responsibility. What were you doing over here?" "I was doing a perimeter walk. That's not part of your assignment. You're 2 months out of the academy. You don't modify your assigned duties without authorization. And when you encounter situations outside your expertise, you radio for guidance from someone with more experience. Instead, you made assumptions and called a tow truck to remove the chief judge's car from the chief judge's parking space outside the chief judge's courthouse." By this point, over a dozen court employees had gathered, some recording on their phones, all witnessing the dressing down of a rookie officer who'd made the worst possible mistake on what should have been a routine morning shift. The tow truck driver had wisely departed after being waved off by Martinez.
Marcus stood beside his car, checking his watch. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. It was now 8:27. He needed time to review files, prepare his courtroom, and ensure everything was ready. This encounter had already consumed 15 minutes he didn't have. "Lieutenant, I need to get to my chambers. I have a hearing at 9. "Of course, Chief Judge. Again, I apologize. This will be fully investigated." Marcus nodded, gathered his briefcase from the back seat, and walked toward the courthouse entrance. Staff parted to let him through, some offering sympathetic looks, others shaking their heads at what they witnessed. He maintained perfect composure until he reached his chambers, closed the door, and sat at his desk, allowing himself a moment to process what had just happened. He'd been a judge for 17 years, had presided over thousands of cases, had sentenced defendants, ruled on complex legal matters, managed difficult attorneys and emotional families. But he'd never been made to feel like he didn't belong in his own courthouse until a rookie officer who'd been on the job for 2 months decided he looked suspicious. Jennifer Chen knocked softly and entered. "Judge, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Jennifer, but I'm not letting this go. Call my attorney. I'm filing a formal complaint with the department and a civil rights lawsuit. This needs to be documented and addressed. Do you think the rookie should have been fired on the spot? Yes or no? Tell me in the comments."
Within 24 hours, the Bodycam footage had leaked. Court employees who'd witnessed the encounter had provided statements to media outlets. By Friday afternoon, local news stations were leading with the story. Rookie officer attempts to tow chief judge's car, claims he doesn't look like he works there. The footage spread rapidly across social media platforms. Legal communities shared it with outrage. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the officer's conduct. Bar associations released formal comments supporting Chief Judge Ellison. The video was viewed over 8 million times in the first 48 hours. The comment sections reflected universal condemnation. Imagine trying to tow your boss's boss's car. That officer's career is over before it started. The audacity of telling a chief judge he doesn't belong at his own courthouse? This is what implicit bias looks like. Assuming a black man in a suit can't possibly be the chief judge. The Brookwood County Sheriff's Department, which provided courthouse security, released a brief initial statement. "We are aware of an incident involving one of our officers and Chief Judge Ellison. The matter is under investigation. Officer Kelton has been placed on administrative leave pending review." But Monday morning, facing mounting public pressure and media scrutiny,
the department held a formal press conference. Sheriff Patricia Henderson stood at a podium, flanked by Internal Affairs Commander and the department's Public Information Officer. After reviewing body camera footage and witness statements, we have determined that Officer Ryan Kelton acted inappropriately when he confronted Chief Judge Marcus Ellison in the judicial parking lot. Officer Kelton made assumptions based on appearance rather than gathering factual information readily available to him. He exceeded his assigned duties, failed to verify parking authorization before calling for a tow, and demonstrated a concerning lack of judgment for someone in a law enforcement position.
She paused, her expression grim. Officer Kelton's employment with this department has been terminated, effective immediately. We are implementing additional training protocols to ensure similar incidents do not occur, and we extend our sincere apology to Chief Judge Ellison for this unacceptable encounter. The termination was swift, unusually so for law enforcement, where problem officers typically face lengthy administrative processes before final employment decisions. But the clarity of the video evidence, the prominence of the victim, and the potential legal liability made quick action the only viable path. Officer Ryan Kelton's law enforcement career lasted exactly 2 months and 3 days. The body cam footage of him telling a chief judge he doesn't look like someone who works in this building would follow him permanently, making employment in any law enforcement capacity impossible. Chief Judge Ellison broke his public silence Tuesday evening, releasing a statement through his attorney. The encounter outside my courthouse was deeply troubling, not because of the inconvenience it caused me, but because of what it represents. I am a chief judge. I have resources, platform, and legal knowledge to address what happened. But this kind of assumption-based policing happens to black people every day who don't have my advantages. They get questioned in their own neighborhoods, stopped in their own cars, challenged in their own workplaces. The only difference is that when it happens to me, it makes headlines. When it happens to them, it's Tuesday. He continued. Officer Kelton's termination is appropriate, but it doesn't address the systemic issues that produced his behavior. How does a rookie officer develop the belief that he can determine who belongs in a courthouse based on appearance? How does he get through academy training without learning to verify facts before taking action? How does he receive an assignment to courthouse security without understanding basic protocols about judicial parking? These are questions the department must answer if it wants to prevent future incidents. Should the judge have pressed charges personally? What would you do? Drop your thoughts below.
6 weeks after the parking lot encounter, Chief Judge Marcus Ellison filed a comprehensive federal civil rights lawsuit in U.S. District Court. The complaint named Officer Ryan Kelton individually, Lieutenant David Martinez as supervising officer, and Brookwood County Sheriff's Department. The legal claims were extensive and meticulously documented. Count 1, Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful seizure. Kelton's confrontation and threat to tow Marcus's vehicle constituted an unreasonable seizure of property without cause. Count 2, 14th Amendment violation, racial discrimination. Kelton's statement that Marcus didn't look like someone who works in this building revealed that the stop was motivated by racial bias. Count 3, violation of civil rights under color of law. Kelton used his authority as a law enforcement officer to harass Marcus based on race, violating federal civil rights statutes. Count 4, intentional infliction of emotional harm. Being publicly questioned about belonging in his own courthouse in front of staff and colleagues caused significant emotional harm. Count 5, interference with official duties. Kelton's actions delayed Marcus's preparation for a scheduled court hearing, interfering with judicial responsibilities. Count 6, municipal liability. The department's inadequate training, failure to properly supervise Kelton, and pattern of clearing officers for duty without sufficient preparation created conditions enabling the violation. Count 7, defamation. Kelton's public statements and actions impugned Marcus's professional reputation and implied criminal wrongdoing. The lawsuit sought $20 million in damages.
comprehensive reforms to training and supervision protocols, and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The discovery phase revealed information that made the department's institutional negligence clear. Kelton's academy evaluations showed repeated warnings about overconfidence and poor judgment. His field training officer had recommended additional supervised duty before solo assignment. That recommendation had been overridden by administrative need to fill courthouse security position.
6 weeks after the parking lot encounter, Chief Judge Marcus Ellison filed a comprehensive federal civil rights lawsuit in U.S. District Court. The complaint named Officer Ryan Kelton individually, Lieutenant David Martinez as supervising officer, and Brookwood County Sheriff's Department. The legal claims were extensive and meticulously documented. Count 1, Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful seizure. Kelton's confrontation and threat to tow Marcus's vehicle constituted an unreasonable seizure of property without cause. Count 2, 14th Amendment violation, racial discrimination. Kelton's statement that Marcus didn't look like someone who works in this building revealed that the stop was motivated by racial bias. Count 3, violation of civil rights under color of law. Kelton used his authority as a law enforcement officer to harass Marcus based on race, violating federal civil rights statutes. Count 4, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Being publicly questioned about belonging in his own courthouse in front of staff and colleagues caused significant emotional harm. Count 5, interference with official duties. Kelton's actions delayed Marcus's preparation for a scheduled court hearing, interfering with judicial responsibilities. Count 6, municipal liability. The department's inadequate training, failure to properly supervise Kelton, and pattern of clearing officers for duty without sufficient preparation created conditions enabling the violation. Count 7, defamation. Kelton's public statements and actions impugned Marcus's professional reputation and implied criminal wrongdoing. The lawsuit sought $20 million in damages, comprehensive reforms to training and supervision protocols, and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The discovery phase revealed information that made the department's institutional negligence clear. Kelton's academy evaluations showed repeated warnings about overconfidence and poor judgment. His field training officer had recommended additional supervised duty before solo assignment. That recommendation had been overridden by administrative need to fill courthouse security position.
The $17 million settlement was announced at a joint press conference 16 months after the parking lot encounter. Chief Judge Ellison stood at a podium, flanked by his attorneys, facing dozens of cameras and reporters. "This settlement represents accountability," he began, his voice carrying the same measured authority he brought to his courtroom. "But I want to be clear about what it means and what it doesn't mean. It means the county has acknowledged that what Officer Kelton did was wrong, was discriminatory, and was enabled by systemic failures in training and supervision. That acknowledgement matters." He paused, looking directly at the cameras. "But money doesn't undo the experience of being told you don't belong in your own courthouse. It doesn't erase the humiliation of being questioned in front of colleagues and staff. It doesn't restore the sense that your professional accomplishments should be sufficient to establish your legitimacy. What this settlement can do is force institutional change that prevents the next person who won't have my resources or platform from experiencing the same discrimination." Marcus donated $5 million of the settlement to establish the Judicial Diversity Fellowship Program, providing support for law students of color pursuing careers in the judiciary. He continued serving as chief judge, though the incident left lasting impact. He was more aware now of how staff watched him, more conscious of the symbolic weight he carried as the first black chief judge, more exhausted by the reality that even at the highest levels of achievement, assumptions about who belongs persist. Officer Ryan Kelton disappeared from public view after his termination.
His law enforcement career had lasted 2 months. The Bodycam footage had been viewed over 20 million times, making him unemployable in any criminal justice capacity. He moved out of state within 6 months. His law enforcement aspirations permanently finished. The reforms implemented at Brookwood County Courthouse showed measurable results. Officers completed comprehensive training before courthouse assignments. Unnecessary contacts with staff dropped by 74%.
No officer showed patterns of racially disparate interactions in the 2 years following implementation. The external monitors reports documented genuine progress. But Chief Judge Ellison's case remained extraordinary in one critical way. His position gave him power to demand accountability that most victims of racial profiling never have. Most people questioned about belonging in their own spaces don't have federal credentials, don't have media attention, don't have $17 million settlements forcing institutional change. They just have the violation, the exhaustion, and the daily reality that their right to exist in spaces they've earned remains conditional on others' perceptions. 3 years after the parking lot encounter, Marcus reflected in a Ray interview. People sometimes ask if I've moved past it. The truth is, you don't move past being told you don't belong in your own courthouse. You integrate it into your understanding of how the world works. I'm still Chief Judge. I still park in that same space every day. But I'm also more aware now, more cautious, more conscious that my appearance can trigger assumptions that override obvious facts. That's the tax of being black in professional spaces, carrying the knowledge that achievement doesn't always protect you from prejudice. The Bodycam footage remains online, a permanent record of how bias manifests in split-second assumptions, the rookie officer's career-ending mistake, the chief judge's measured response, the institutional failures that enabled the encounter. 20 million views across platforms, a case study used in law schools, judicial training programs, and police academies. The parking space outside Brookwood County Courthouse still bears the sign, "Reserved, Chief Judge Marcus Ellison." The courthouse still operates daily, dispensing justice, managing cases, serving the community. But that space represents something larger now. A reminder that even the highest-ranking judicial officer can be questioned about belonging, that badges and credentials don't eliminate bias, that the cost of assumptions extends far beyond individual encounters. Officer Kelton learned the hard way that not everyone you disrespect is powerless. Some of them run